Hello, and welcome to the Lee and D podcast show.
I think,
aren't
we going to call this the We Are Unique podcast?
Oh, yes. Hello, and welcome to the We Are Unique podcast.
Episode 3. The 2 previous episodes don't have a proper introduction.
Yes.
This one doesn't either, as you can tell.
We're trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah. But this week, we worked on a logo, which is pretty exciting.
You worked on the logo.
Yes, but I took consultancy from you, and so you gave your input, and we've come up with a logo.
Yeah.
We're not sure it's something that we will keep forever. At least I don't think so. I don't know how you feel about it.
It can always change in the future as we grow and change and develop.
Yeah, but I feel like it's a good first step and a good first logo, and it's good enough to launch this podcast with and launch a small website with or something like that. I don't even know what all we want to launch with We Are Unique. We're doing the podcast.
Yeah.
We'll probably have a newsletter.
Maybe.
Which is kind of... So my plan was to take the idea of the podcast, get a summary, and send that out as a newsletter so that people that want to read can read it rather than watch a 20, 30-minute podcast episode.
Yeah, fair.
And that also means we have a newsletter that we can then send out every week.
But just remember that putting too much out and doing too much also means that then that's a lot of overhead and a lot of time into just social media and not actually building a business and building products. And so being able to talk about it and just put stuff out for people to listen to, which people prefer. I don't feel like we're putting anything profound enough out there. I know that probably doesn't sounds a bit condescending to us, but I don't feel like we're putting anything profound enough out there that actually needs to be written down. Like it's something that people can listen to and share in and join in on the journey. And when we start doing profound things about the business and learning things and sharing all of those like insights and tools and ways of doing things, I feel like that's when you can really start to write it down for people to like take it.
That makes sense. But I think in the meantime, we should start gathering a newsletter list so that when we have those profound things, people can follow along.
Fair enough. Yes.
Great. Subscribe to our newsletter. There will be a link in the show notes. If I figure out how to do that and remember when I come to editing this video and publishing it.
Hopefully you'll listen back to it and then you'll be fine.
I will listen to it.
At like 5 times the speed.
I will listen to it attentively when I'm editing it, and before I submit it to podcast things, I will make sure that I've listened to it and I've taken out all the notes and everything is in the notes.
Cool story, bro.
Great. So what are we talking about this morning?
Well, we were sort of talking about what did you want to talk about earlier? Because we kind of had some pre-conversations about going in, like you're on sabbatical as of yesterday, which means that you have 2 months to build something and potentially try and I'm not sure, like it depends on scoping out the project, how big of a project this will be, and if you could ship it in that time or if it'll have to roll over into you going back to work in your free time building it more.
Yep. Something that we came up with the other day that we haven't talked about on the podcast yet is ShipMyApp.
Yes.
So this is a new idea. It's sort of an extension in many ways, or an adaptation or a pivot on the concept that we had of mobile teams at scale.
Yes.
We had that conversation in episode 1, and we've had other conversations since, and we've been inspired by this idea of ShipMyApp. And there's kind of different layers to it, which we haven't talked about. So I want to share the layers approach to it, but I first want to explain the basic concept.
Yes.
The idea is that when you start a new mobile app, it's very exciting to go and build the product of this app is going to do X, and you go and you build X. The problem is that you can't ship that app to the App Store until you do a bunch of other things. You need to put analytics in there. If you plan on selling the app, you need to put a paywall in. You need to choose a database. You need to choose an architecture. You need to do all of these things. And there's quite a lot of setup work to do before you can ship a product to the App Store.
Yeah, because building a proof of concept is relatively easy, but then building something to actually put out there to also then, especially for startups, get more investment, you can't really do without having some sort of a viable product.
Exactly. So you can build the product, but if you can't see the data to show that it's working or what isn't working, you can't monitor crashes to know that your users are having a good experience, all these sorts of things. It's really hard you can't move quickly and learn quickly and all that sort of thing with the data coming from your app. And so it's worth investing in putting all of these things in place. That goes very much for an app that is built for a startup. It also goes for an app that's built by an indie developer just for themselves to try and earn some money. Less so, though. The other thing we talked about around this is we've had this idea of something that would be pretty cool for me to do is to be able to be like a startup consultant or a serial founding engineer or a serial founding iOS engineer.
Yeah, just a serial startup engineer, because you've always wanted to build something from the ground up. And with all the frustrations that you've experienced in different companies that you've worked at, is how the code base is, there's always so much technical debt that you've got to go back and fix, that businesses, when they're growing, don't want to invest the time in to go back. And so what if you could start with a better baseline to then mitigate a lot of that technical debt?
Exactly. And that's where ShipMyApp comes in. You give engineers, startup engineers or indie developers, a baseline, well-structured starting point for the app, so that as the app grows and scales, you start off on the right foot with less technical debt that doesn't accumulate very easily over time. And so hopefully in a few months, years' time, when your app is getting really big, you don't have heaps of debt that you need to still pay back.
Precisely.
Because you've started off on a solid foundation.
But also, one of the things that we talked about was startups will usually not be able to afford a good senior engineer. They'll be able to afford like a high junior or a low mid-level engineer to come in and build the starting product for them, usually.
Correct, because engineers are expensive and startups typically
Can't afford all of that.
They don't have a lot of money, or they're trying to spend as little money to get as much progress as possible.
Yes. And so it will take a year or more to ship something that's really good. And it's not going to be built well. It's going to be built with a lot of technical debt. And chances are that people will start that and then they'll leave. Or the startup won't be able to afford them after a year. So there's this massive pressure. But if you can sell a baseline to a startup, then they can afford a mid-level engineer to come in and plug everything in and have a product within 6 months. Or, they say, oh, well, I can afford to pay this much for a mid-level for a year to come and build an app from scratch. And you go, okay, well, you could build a consultancy business off of that. So you pay 10 or 15% of what you would pay that engineer for a year for your baseline, and then you consult for 6 months. And so they've spent the same amount of money, but they ship an app in 6 months with less technical debt in a year. And so then they don't have to from that point on, once they've shipped, they get more investment, they can then employ someone full time at like the low end of mid-level to come and build on a proper, on a good solid foundation and a good solid platform. And so everything will have technical debt over time, sure, but you'll be starting with no technical debt, and then whichever direction the app decides to go into will then generate its own technical debt in one way, shape or form. But then that is moving forward, not from completed product, first version, here you go, and it's built really well.
Yeah. So the idea then merged with another startup that we had seen, which was called ShipFast.
Yes.
And this
is what sparked a lot of it as well.
Exactly. ShipFast does a similar sort of thing, but for web apps, where you buy ShipFast. It's made by Mark Louvignol or something like that. He's French, and I don't quite know how to pronounce his surname, but I think...
apologies if we didn't get that right.
Sorry if I got it wrong, Mark. But if you're listening, I'm already stoked, so cool. But Mark Louvignol or something like that built ShipFast, and what that does is it gives you a framework for web apps. And it's opinionated. There are so many different frameworks for web apps out there, but he's made the decisions of which frameworks to use, which tools to use, packaged it all together, written great documentation, and engineers can go and buy this and cut down all of the initial setup work for every web app that they build from a week to a day sort of thing, which is fantastic. And it means if you want to ship a startup that would have taken you a week, you can do it in 2 days. And if you can move that fast, that's incredibly valuable as an indie developer, but it's also incredibly valuable for a startup. And so we want to replicate this for iOS apps.
And hopefully one day Android. But we're starting with iOS.
I actually want to replicate it for mobile. So I was chatting to some friends who include a group of mobile developers. They're also back-end and product designers and all sorts. So a really mixed, diverse group of friends. And some of them were saying this would also be great for React Native and Flutter, which are both cross-platform tools to build apps for iOS and Android at the same time. And I do agree that it would be great to have them for those platforms. So the idea would be to do it for mobile apps, starting with iOS, adding Android, both native, then moving on to React Native and or Flutter.
You expand your offering as you grow, and as you potentially even like have these friends come in and build that kind of stuff for us on the side, and then become like investors in the business or become shareholders in this little company or take profit or whatever, however you then structure that on that side of things, and actually have people who you know and trust as experts come in and build that as well.
Exactly. Then the part that you and I haven't talked about yet, the idea that I had was there are kind of two target audiences for this. There are indie developers, so people who just want to create an app for themselves to put on the App Store, try and make a bit of money, etc. And then there are startup engineers, people who are starting an app that's part of a bigger company and they intend to work on it with a team and grow the team and that sort of thing over time. And those two have slightly different needs. The indie developer probably wants minimal complication in their app. They are going to pick a tool and they're going to use that tool, and they don't have any specific intentions to change it.
No.
At any point in future. And they don't need to protect from a large mobile team because the chances are it will only ever be one engineer.
Yes.
So they don't have to put things in place for them. The startup is quite different in the sense that it probably needs a lot more flexibility in terms of the tools that it uses, because you would typically try and use the same tools across a wide part of your company. And so a mobile first analytics product may work great for an indie developer, but it may not work great for a startup. They may want to use something else for the analytics tooling. Same for the database, same for their CI integrations, all these sorts of things.
For startups, you kind of have to build or account for scalability, whereas with an indie developer, you don't necessarily have to. You would have to worry about scaling from a client-based point of view, but not from a developer user within the company point of view.
Exactly. So I was thinking of building the product slightly differently for these two different markets.
Oh yeah. That's amazing, because there are actually two different markets.
They are very different markets, and pricing them very differently for those two markets.
Yes.
Because an indie developer is not going to pay 10 or 20,000 pounds for something that they can ship an app that might make them 500 pounds or dollars. We should probably work in dollars. But they're probably not going to spend $20,000 to ship an app that might make them $5,000.
Precisely.
Especially if they have no investment.
And something that they could build fast to be able to ship it onto the app, and then add things later as they're growing and developing their own app. But if you could give them a decent platform to start on, then they don't have to invest that time. But it also wasn't a huge monetary investment. It was justifiably enough to pay to get them like hit the ground running sooner. Like the end has to justify the means, essentially, the cost.
So the indie developer doesn't need all that flexibility. The startup does, and they will also have a different kind of budget, because typically a startup will go and get some funding, some seed funding of some sort, or a first round of investment or something like that, and they will have a bit of money that they can put into this. They will also probably want more support getting set up. If they've got a dedicated engineer, then they may be very happy to not buy this product, not buy ShipMyApp. But if they don't, they may want support getting ShipMyApp set up and ready for their first engineer. They may even want help and support hiring their first engineer.
Yes.
And things like that. So you can target it very differently.
Because you have a lot of hiring experience, that actually helps quite a lot.
Exactly. And
nice.
Yes. And so you can target these two products at two very different markets and with very different pricing. So for the indie developer, you charge $200 or occasionally run discounts or specials to $150 or $100 or something like that. You bring the price right down.
But it is a very stripped back version with low support.
So with the startup option, you can charge a lot more, but you can also offer a lot more services to them. You can offer more support, and you can offer consulting and hiring and all of these different add-ons. You can also change the code quite significantly. So you build it in a more abstract way. And so what that means is, for the non-developers, when you build analytics into your app, as an example, analytics are basically things that when you land on a screen, we report that a user landed on that screen. When they tap on a button, we report that they've tapped on that button. We keep a log of all of these things, and that helps us test assumptions. Like, if we put this text on the screen, people are more likely to tap on the button or less likely to tap on the button. It also lets us understand how far through a flow people are moving, because we can see which screens they visit, and then we can see where they back out of a flow. And so if we're trying to take people through a journey to buy something from us, we can see where in the journey are they stopping by having screen analytics. So that's what we use analytics for. And there are loads of platforms to do that. Now, the easy way to integrate with those platforms is you choose one, you put it in your app, and you say platform.send analytics event, and you tell it what event and it sends it. And that's great, and it's really quick and easy to implement. The problem with that is, if you ever want to change your analytics platform, you have to go and find every platform.send analytics event and update it to use the new tool. And that can be a huge amount of work. So what you do in software development is you do what's called an abstraction, where you put like a layer of your own code between the two. And so instead of calling platform.send analytics event, you go my platform.send analytics event. And then you write extra code that translates it from my platform to platform that you're using. And then if you ever swap out the platform that you're using, all you have to do is you have to just rewrite the translation code from my platform to new platform. And you write one piece of translation code, but the rest of your app stays unchanged. And that's very efficient when you're then moving from one thing to another. And so you can do things like that for the startup version, which you wouldn't do for the indie version, because for the indie version, it's much easier to just write platform.send analytics event.
Yep.
The other thing in startups is there's a very good chance you will have multiple engineers building on it. So you set up CI pipelines for things like running the tests on PRs and running tests, because very often indie developers won't write tests for their code, which is a good way to move fast.
Yes.
But for a startup, you very often will write tests for your code, or at least want to try and write tests for your code. So you would then want to set up the CI, which is a computer on the internet that runs your tests for you, so you don't have to sit and wait for your computer to run the tests. And you would set up the CI to run those tests for you, and you could include that in the startup. And there's a bunch of other things around that a startup would need that an indie developer wouldn't. So you can put all of those things in place and make it a really great experience for a startup and set them off on a really good foundation. Most startups probably wouldn't start by building those abstractions, because as a startup, when you're trying to find product market fit and trying to get your app out there, you don't optimize for those things, but it does become technical debt in the future. And so
yes,
a startup,
and you've got to go back and rewrite, like write all of that in, and probably fix whatever and redo whatever you've tried to implement in that period of time.
Exactly. And realistically, a lot of startups don't do that, and that puts them on the back foot, because now they're tied into the specific platform they chose when they started up.
Yes.
Or they have to spend a huge amount of time and effort getting rid of that platform, which is wasted time and effort. So getting them off on the right foot is incredibly valuable to them, especially down the line.
Yes.
How we sell that in terms of this is worth $20,000 up front is going to be interesting. There will be engineers, startup engineers, who will just get it and it will be fine. Other people may not get it, and that's okay.
But I think that's also then using some of the skills that you've learned, and also trying to figure out, how do you justify that from a business perspective? Because what is it's cost versus impact. And so what impact does that have, getting your proof of concept? So you've got your initial funding, and then you're building fast, and then to get more funding and to get more investors. And how do you justify spending that? But that's why I also said, like, if you've got an engineer, or you don't have an engineer, but you've got the idea, and you come and you buy the platform and you pay what you would pay a mid-level to get you to product in 6 months, I think that's a really great justification.
Brilliant.
Because fine, at the end of 6 months, you've got a product and you've got no engineer, but you've got a product, you've got a really good platform, and so you can then afford to bring in a mid-level engineer to keep building on a really solid foundation, which I think is a great business case. And you could also use the consultancy side of what we could potentially be doing, that you could then interview and get them a really good engineer that's technically savvy enough, product savvy enough to then continue on building, and that they can then employ to carry on, building into the future of whatever it is they intend on doing next with their product.
Exactly. So that was kind of the idea of splitting the two.
Yep.
This morning I woke up at 6 a.m. and I couldn't go back to sleep.
I noticed.
And I was scrolling through Mastodon, which is sort of a Twitter alternative.
Okay.
So when
You mean an X alternative,
An X
but Twitter,
alternative.
yes,
yes,
because we are millennials.
exactly.
No, it will
And
always be Twitter.
it will always be Twitter. So Mastodon is kind of a Twitter alternative, and it's a bit more complex and technical, but that's not relevant for now. What is relevant is that I was scrolling through Mastodon and I came across somebody who's actually built an iOS boilerplate sort of product like ShipMyApp.
Yeah.
And I went onto their website and had a look at it. And theirs is very much focused on AR. So it's not really a direct competitor, but it's cool to see that there's someone who's built something similar. But I then somehow came across a website where they have listed all of the different boilerplate boilerplate product building template things
Yeah.
across all sorts of different platforms. And under the iOS section, there are like 8 or 9 of these different template things already.
I assume you've saved this somewhere.
I have.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are actually tons of these already existing out there, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's good in the sense that it suggests that there might be a market for this.
Yeah.
It's bad in that this is competition, but a little competition never hurts anyone.
No.
And
just because there's competition doesn't mean that there's enough business to go around for everyone.
exactly, doesn't mean that there is enough business.
That there isn't enough.
That there isn't enough business. Agreed. I did notice that there are certain things that I would want to put in place that don't exist in a lot of these. And only one of the 8 or 9 has any sort of focus on startups. They're all focused on indie developers. And I think that's significant because I feel I could build something really great for startups.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I think that the focus should maybe be more on the startup side because there's less of competition for that. But I'm not sure because the startup one will be a lot more work. And so it's probably worth building the indie one, shipping that,
and then building on that
and then extending on that. Yes.
for the startup. Yeah.
From the other great thing about this website, the other great thing about this website is that it also has Android, React Native, and Flutter. And so we can go and find existing templates on those platforms or on those technologies and use those as inspiration as well for building our own. There's only one for Android. And so perhaps there's an even better market for starting something like this on Android.
Yes.
Because there's only one competitor out there, at least on this website. So there probably are other competitors, but on this website, there's only one listed. And there are a few for React Native and a few for Flutter.
Yes.
So I thought that was very interesting. It's cool to have some reference points, and it's a great sort of starting point for research.
Oh, 100%.
So that's cool. And their pricing is varied, but it's all in the range of sort of $100 to $200-ish.
Okay, so at least like that's a good frame of reference of what do you charge and what sets you apart and all of that. Something that I wanted to say earlier is, and this was something I found incredibly frustrating when, like the whole dream of getting into Formula One and all of that. And something that a lot of people had said to me is very often it's not always just about what you can do, but about who you know. And I always found that incredibly frustrating because it's like my talent should be enough. But I think in a world with 7 billion people, it will massively come down to who you know and how you can get word of mouth out, like how you can get how do I say this, by word of mouth, how to get your product out there to people. And I think that you're sitting in a really wonderful position of having built the community that you have through your job here in this country, going, well, So many of them have gone out, started their own businesses, or are probably in the process of thinking about starting their own businesses, but it's so daunting and overwhelming and such a big undertaking with their full-time jobs and their lives that they have, that like a lot of them probably haven't done it. And so being able to tap into that community that you do have could enable a lot of people that you know and that they potentially know to start their own businesses. And if you could provide a springboard for them, they could build fast, get their funding and start businesses, which will only continue to spread what it is you're providing.
Exactly. The community around this and the people around this are going to be a key factor.
Yeah.
The fact that there are 5 or 6 of these, or 8 or 9, I think I said, of these boilerplates that are out there that I've never heard of suggests 2 things. Potentially that my community doesn't overlap with these people's community, and so may have a market that is untapped.
Yeah.
Or it means that those folk are building that, but they aren't necessarily marketing it within a community. They aren't building the community aspect of it, which is what you really need.
Or they haven't found a community to tap into. So.
Exactly. Which is what you really need to get sales. And so there's potentially some sort of competitive advantage there over them in some way, shape or form. So that is ShipMyApp. That's the idea. And I'm quite excited about it. I think it's probably one of the first ideas I might start working on. In some ways, I want another app idea to use as the foundation of building ShipMyApp.
But you do.
I do, maybe.
Oh.
And we will save that for a later conversation.
That's perfect.
So that's all from us for today, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I'm good.
Ooh, that was scary. Anyway, that's all from us for today.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening along.
Yep.
We hope
Thanks for joining us on this crazy journey.
Exactly. We hope that you found this episode somewhat interesting. If there's anything that we've talked about that didn't make sense, that you're curious about, please let us know in the comments or leave us a review and ask us questions.
If you have any crazy ideas about what should go into a boilerplate startup or indie platform on iOS that you think would be helpful to you, give us a shout. Let us know what you think. And if you have any ideas, like we are very happy to try anything and everything and see what works and what's helpful to people, because as much as you have knowledge of what would be helpful, like there are other people out there who may have different things that they would really like to have or be able to plug in. But yes.
Exactly. And if you have a startup and you're looking for an iOS engineer, some support or some consulting to get your startup off the ground, reach out, let me know. Very excited to help you out.
Yeah.
Like, subscribe, follow us.
Do all of the interwebby things.
Follow us on social media. We are Uniek everywhere. So find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Where else are we? YouTube.
Hopefully be on Apple Podcasts soon.
And Spotify and everywhere else that you listen to podcasts.
There you go.
So drop us a follow, drop a like on this video or this podcast, leave a review, leave a comment, and we look forward to chatting to you in the next episode.
Yeah. Catch you next time.
Toodaloo.